outdoor orientation student experience virtual programming. So tonight we are excited to speak with a variety of prior and current McMaster students who are involved in different areas of the outdoors about how to partake in outdoor adventures in ways that are environmentally sustainable. So a few housekeeping items. So the first, I will note you might have just gotten a message on your screen that tonight's panel discussion will be recorded and so that it can be available to all Moose participants following the event. So just note that if you do want to speak, that it would be recorded and shared. Additionally, I will ask that all participants and panelists who are not speaking keep their microphones on mute to reduce the background noise. And if you can also keep your video off when you're not speaking, that will help with the bandwidth so that hopefully we don't have too much going in and out and lagging in terms of the timing. And then throughout the panel, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat function. And then there will be a Q&A session at the end where depending if you want to speak up using your video, you're welcome to, as well as still using the chat function if you're more comfortable. So my name is Gabriella Christopher, and I'm one of the Moose coordinators this year. I'm entering my 4th year of the Health Sciences program, and I'm passionate about the benefits of spending time in nature. So I'm so excited to be co-hosting this event tonight with Hannah. I don't know, Hannah, if you want to give a little introduction as well.
Sure. I'm Hannah. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going into my 2nd year in the astrophysics program. And I'm also one of the Moose coordinators for this year, as well as I'm on the outdoor club. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about either of those two things.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So to begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We want to take this time to recognize that McMaster is situated on the traditional territory shared between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations, which was acknowledged in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt. The wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory and one spoon to represent that the people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. For students who are not around McMaster campus currently, I encourage you to research and reflect upon the Indigenous history of the land you occupy right now and going forward. A website you can use to begin this ongoing learning process is www.native-land.ca, and we can share that in the chat as well. So with this, we give honor and thanks to the traditional inhabitants of the land we occupy and acknowledge our responsibility as guests of this land to respect the land as well as the relationship Indigenous people have to the land. So as we speak today and the rest of Moose about enjoying and appreciating natural environments, it is because of Indigenous knowledge and land protection that we have this privilege today. Respect for all elements of our world is central to Indigenous teachings as we speak about how to ensure the sustainability of how we interact with nature. I hope we can ultimately come back to this principle of universal respect. And so while today we don't have anyone speaking from an Indigenous perspective, I encourage you to tune in on Tuesday, August 25th for our 4th panel discussion as we address gender, culture, and race and the impacts on the areas we explore. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce our 3 live panelists, as well as one panelist who is joining us through a pre-recording to help us understand how different practices in outdoor exploration can impact the environment and how we can prevent additional harm and demonstrate respect for nature. So firstly, we have Noah Stegman. Noah is the president of the McMaster Outdoors Club. He completed his undergraduate degree in Earth and Environmental Science at McMaster and is pursuing a Master's of Biology here at McMaster as well. Noah has led countless trips, is an expert on plants and bees, and is passionate about biology, conservation, and research. We are so lucky to have him with us tonight. So I'll pass it off to Noah. And our first, just to do a little introductory question, if you want to share what your favorite way has been to enjoy the outdoors throughout the pandemic.
Thank you, Gabriella. So for me, it has to be directed to my master's work. So I have been getting outside at least a few days a week for pretty much the whole day ever since the pandemic started in February. And I go out and I survey flowers and bees in Hamilton and around McMaster. So lots of fun.
That's so cool. So next we have Abbie Little. Abbie is the Community Relations Coordinator for the Academic Sustainability Programs Office. Herself also a graduate from McMaster of Geography and Environmental Science. Abbie has been involved in environmental advocacy in a variety of capacities, including serving on the committee of Cycle Hamilton. In April, Abbie was named one of Canada's top 25 environmentalists under 25. She has extensive experience hiking and camping across Ontario and beyond. So thank you so much for joining us today, Abbie. And I'll ask you the same question. What has been your favorite way to enjoy the outdoors throughout the pandemic?
Sure, thanks so much for having me. I would say my favorite way to enjoy the outdoors, I recently got one of those hammocks you put up between a couple trees, and I've been going to my local park and just sitting there and reading. I'm in a book club with some friends, so I've been reading a book every month. I'm also hiking locally and exploring what Hamilton has to offer. I live right downtown, so I'm doing that, and went on a camping trip about a month ago to Killarney, Manitoulin, and Tobermory. So fun little week off camping and exploring Ontario.
That sounds amazing. On my bucket list for sure. So thirdly, we have Nicole. Nicole works with the Royal Botanical Gardens. She is an expert in many local parks and outdoor spaces, in addition to herself being an expert gardener, maintaining 2 vegetable gardens, in addition to raising local butterflies and supporting local pollinators. Nicole is entering her 4th year of an honors degree in political science and is a research assistant under the Department of Civil Engineering, working on white papers addressing local trail systems, community garden, and the environment. So thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. And what would you also like to share what your favorite way to enjoy the outdoors has been throughout the pandemic?
Thank you for that glowing introduction, Gabby. I don't know if I'm an expert gardener, but I've definitely been gardening a lot. So I have 2 vegetable gardens, a few flower beds. So I've been doing that. I'm also raising butterflies, and then I love kayaking. So to answer your question, the 2 big things that I'm doing are gardening and kayaking. And I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you, Nicole. And personally, I have seen the products of her garden, so definitely expert gardener. And so lastly, we are really excited to have the participation of Claire de Souza. Although Claire cannot be with us live right now, as she is currently working at Pancake Bay Provincial Park and without internet access tonight, she has pre-recorded some of her responses to some of the questions that we're asking. And so we're really lucky to be able to share those recordings as Hannah will be sharing them from her screen. So I will pass it off for Claire's introduction.
Thank you so much for tuning into this important discussion around sustainability and outdoor recreation. My name is Claire de Souza, and I recently graduated from McMaster University with a bachelor's degree in honors geography and environmental studies. Since grade 11, I've spent my summers working for Ontario Parks in several parks across Northern Ontario. Right now, the reason why I'm doing a pre-recording of this is because I'm a bit remote. I'm at Pancake Bay Provincial Park near Sault Ste. Marie, and I'm running the backcountry operations out of the park. So yeah, just in general, my work experience along with my academic background has really developed my passion for sustainability and outdoor recreation. I truly believe that in order to have like a holistic understanding of what sustainability is, you have to spend time outside and in nature. I know the time I've spent outside and in our natural spaces and camping and canoeing, that has really grown my appreciation for our natural environment and has instilled in me the importance of it and knowing how to help it. I think, yeah, being outside really gives you that knowledge, which is a great thing. I also think that this conversation is happening at a perfect time because with COVID-19, a lot of people are realizing that the outdoors are really the only thing that's truly open right now with not a lot of restrictions. So that's kind of we've seen a huge influx in camping because of that. So I think it's important to acknowledge that while people are enjoying it more, it can put a huge strain on our natural spaces. So it's important to enjoy them, but do so responsibly and sustainably.
Thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. And so we'll get started with the questions for our panelists. So we'll have some questions regarding both kind of day adventures in local and urban environments, as well as questions regarding longer camping trips in the backcountry. So our first topic is around travel. And so transportation and getting to the location of your adventure. So I'll start with directing this towards Nicole. So in the context of Hamiltonian conservation areas and parks, what options do folks have to access such areas, and how can sustainability be part of someone's decision on where to go and how they get there?
Thanks. So there's really quite a few ways to get to trails, especially in Hamilton, because we do have a full bus system that's connected to Ancaster, Stony Creek, Dundas, and Burlington as well. We also have the SoBe bike program, ride shares, things like that. So when traveling, especially within Hamilton and you're at McMaster, you want to look for the most sustainable ways to travel, obviously, whether this be active transportation, like walking to your destination or riding a bike, or even taking public transportation as well. I work at the RBG, and most of our trails are accessible by bus, right here in Hamilton and also on the outskirts of Burlington. Just one thing to keep in mind, whether you are driving or are taking your bike, you want to be careful for local wildlife on the road, especially as you start to leave the city limits and get into more naturalized areas. This is especially important for turtles. So I can share some information about this. If you see an interturtle, there's a turtle line. I know going down Coots Drive right by McMaster, a lot of people hit turtles and other small local wildlife. So you just want to make sure that when you are either riding your bike or taking your car, you're conscious of everything going on around you. You're not going too fast because you don't want to hurt any animals on the way to your trail. I don't know if that covers the question or...
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. And I really love the touching on turtles, because I think that's something that when you're around Hamilton and driving in like Coots Drive, for example, in Hamilton, students will become quite familiar with. So I wanted to pass this off to Abbie as well to speak to travel in terms of more remote destinations. And so when we talk about backcountry adventures, often driving is required, at least for a part of the journey, to access those destinations like Ontario or national parks, and sometimes even flying for international adventures. So how much should folks think about the carbon footprint of their traveling? And if we're comparing different modes of travel, such as trains, buses, planes, driving, and even biking, are there environmental impacts that we forget regarding this initial part of the journey? And can planning trips in more local environments significantly reduce the impacts of the travel component?
Sure. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about actually is the different components of sustainability. So you have the three pillars, which are social, environmental, and economic. So often we just talk about the environmental sustainability aspect of sustainability, but it's important to consider all three. So when you travel, you want to ensure that you have a positive economic and social impact. Think about the culture of where you're traveling, whose land you're on, how you can support the land, the people, and the local economy. So I just wanted to start by stating that. And then remote destinations. So in the past, I actually went on a hiking trip with McMaster. Noah was the leader, and I went to Hawaii when I graduated from Mac. So we had to take multiple flights to get there to go on a hiking trip. So I'm very aware of some of the less environmentally sustainable ways of getting to remote places. But first, I wanted to just talk about air travel. So the total carbon impact of a single flight is just so high that avoiding just one trip can be equivalent to going gasoline car free for a year. So there is quite an impact that air travel does have on the environment. There are 3 things that you can personally do about flying that I'll lightly touch on. So the first one is to commit to stop flying. There's a pledge on the David Suzuki website where you can take a pledge and say, hey, like air travel is not important to me. I'm committing to stop flying. The second you can do is only fly when it's necessary, stay longer at the destination you're going to, and to take direct flights as opposed to having layovers. And lastly, the other thing that you can do personally is to purchase carbon offsets. They're a partial solution to the problem. If you're not familiar with what carbon offsets are, it's a greenhouse gas reduction that's used to counterbalance or offset a greenhouse gas emission. And buying offsets helps individuals take into account the environmental costs of air travel. It's important to consider the offset programs they're going to. So what I recommend is looking for is called the gold standard, as it's the highest global standard for carbon offsets. And then when you're looking at going, let's say on a camping trip, and car travel is required to get from your home to the destination, I would just recommend trying to fit in as many people as possible into your car. Trying to pick a car that will fit everyone, but is maybe a little better on gas than older vehicles. Potentially, you know, pull a trailer with your equipment so you have more room inside the vehicle for people. And then the last thing I want to touch on is it possible for you to plan a cycling trip? Buy some pannier bags and stuff everything you need to into there. Maybe that's a possibility for you and something to consider. Make it a part of the journey. Oh, and then you had another question, Gabby. Can planning trips in more local environments significantly reduce the impact of travel? So yes, traveling shorter distance is more accessible by biking or walking, and therefore more environmentally friendly. But it's important to consider the ways in which you're traveling. You can take small steps in your daily life to reduce your impact, like cycling or walking to the grocery store, going to farmers markets where there's less packaging and you're supporting the local economy. So there's small things you can do every day, not just on like camping or traveling. And just in general, just travel smart. Just because I try to live a sustainable life does not mean I'm perfect. Like I like to fly to Hawaii to go hiking or to Europe. But in moderation, do little things to reduce your environmental impact. Look into carbon offsets and try to reduce your impact as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Abbie. Those are so many great points. And so hopefully, yeah, with everything going on right now, we can take some time to really appreciate what we have around us in Ontario, and hopefully thus kind of reduce the distances that we're traveling to access natural spaces, as well as considering how we're traveling in our everyday life, as Abbie brought up. So at this point, I'll just see if any of our other panelists want to add on to what's being said before we move on to the next topic.
If I could just add a super quick point, if for whatever reason you're not able to take a form of active transportation like walking or cycling, try to limit single occupancy vehicles. So if you're going on a hiking trip with 3 of your friends, don't all take your own vehicles, try and go together. And that even applies, like Abbie was saying, for everyday things. Like if you're going to the grocery store, COVID restrictions aside, see if your friends also have to go to the grocery store. That way, a whole week's worth of trips for 3 different people are all bundled into one. So just little things like that.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So our next topic, oh, sorry, no.
Sorry, just to add, with sustainable transportation, like biking and busing and trains and those kind of things, they're a lot more accessible than people realize. It takes a little bit more planning for sure than just getting in a car and driving, but it's definitely doable. Bike camping is blowing up and it's huge. Trains, not so much for Ontario, but if you're traveling anywhere out east or out west, VIA has special student rates. You can train all the way across the country and it's not that expensive. And then you get to kind of sit in the car and camp as you go. And even for the Outdoors Club, we have trained from Toronto all the way to the Grand Canyon in Arizona for our camping trips. So even much larger distances is very doable. And there's also a great thing called Park Bus. It's not running right now due to COVID, but I think there's planning to start it up soon. It goes to a whole bunch of national, provincial parks across Canada, but a lot in Ontario too. They leave from Toronto. They have left from Hamilton before. So it's something to look into if you don't have your own method of transportation.
Thank you so much, Noah. So all some great suggestions, and we'll share those in the chat and on the teams as well. But if you have any questions about those kind of particular suggestions that were brought up, feel free to reach out to any of us as well, and we'll be sharing our contact at the end. So our next topic is around waste. And this is food waste as well as human waste, and we'll kind of touch on different aspects. So the first question I'd like to direct is to Abbie. And so when packing food for hiking and camping trips, there's often a lot of kind of single-use packaging that's used for convenience. Things like individually wrapped energy bars and even like rehydrating meals in Ziploc bags. So are these sources of waste really something to be concerned about, or are they of relatively little concern in kind of these specific cases when you're going on long camping trips? And so what kind of waste is avoidable? And for waste that isn't avoidable, what's the appropriate way to deal with it when you're camping?
Sure. So I would say we need to get concerned about it when it's not being packed back out with you. Like if you're leaving your garbage on a trail out in public and littering, that's when it becomes a problem. So just remember to pack out what you pack in. I find that when I'm planning for a camping trip, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. Your equipment, preparing for weather, all of the ingredients you need. So why not just take an extra step and try to plan to go zero waste? There's some great articles out there. There's one on CBC that I found that says going zero waste camping is just a small extra step that you can take to try to reduce the amount of waste that you produce. And also, if you don't have any waste, think about how much lighter your pack will be because you don't have to pack out your garbage afterwards if you're eating everything. So just something to consider. And then you can totally make your own food from scratch, make your own power bars, granola. Try and buy local. You can go to the farmers markets to have less packaging. Like you can just buy hot dogs without all the plastic wrapping, for example. Try to go to Bulk Barn. You can buy individual things there. I honestly reuse my plastic Ziplocs. I just buy the more durable freezer ones and then wash them out and I reuse them. You can also invest in buying more heavy-duty reusable silicone ones. I have a couple of those. I recommend leaving glass behind. I know mason jars are awesome for storing things, but with hiking and camping, they're just heavy and breakable. So try to use reusable snack bags, Tupperware containers if possible, and beeswax wrap. For waste that is avoidable, one thing that I've started doing is instead of like getting to my destination and buying one of those big packs of ice that come in a plastic bag, is I just bring reusable ice packs with me. They're a lot less like water everywhere with your food floating around, keeps things cold, reusable water. A lot of parks in Ontario have potable drinking water, so purchasing bottled water isn't as necessary. Just do some research ahead of time to see if the area you're going to has access to potable water. And if not, I just buy one of those big jugs and fill my water up with that. And for waste that's not avoidable, the appropriate way to deal with it when camping, just pack in what you pack out, like I've already said, but also dispose of it properly. Can it be composted or recycled in an appropriate way or returned somewhere to get a refund? And another small thing that I've just started doing recently because I noticed there's quite a bit of like garbage when I go on hikes is I just bring like a little bag with me, and I pick up other people's garbage. Obviously, you have to be really careful, especially with COVID right now. But I just kind of, I do that as well. I just find that it makes me feel better about reducing the impact, even if it is other people's.
Thank you so much, Abbie. All great suggestions. So I'm going to pass it off to Noah, and feel free to add on as well to waste more generally. But I also wanted to ask about food waste. And sometimes if we're talking about backcountry camping, although it doesn't happen often, sometimes you might have packed too much food, and you kind of want to reduce the weight that you're carrying. And there might be kind of a mentality that you want to get rid of your extra food. So what would be the appropriate way, if there is one, to dispose of food waste when you're camping that doesn't endanger any local ecosystems?
Thank you, Gabby. So for this, it's a complicated question. The best answer is don't bring something in that you're not planning to use or eat, and then whatever you have left over, you bring back out with you. Never really good practice to leave anything behind. Best practices are leave no trace practices. You should leave wherever, whether it's front country, back country, better than how you found it. So like Abbie said, bring a garbage bag, clean up some extra stuff, but you definitely shouldn't be leaving things behind. That being said, you will hear stories of many people who say, oh, you can just burn some food in a fire or bury your food or something along those lines. And they come with different issues. I don't recommend burning food in the fire, any kind, whether it's food scraps or plastics and metals and things like that. They don't burn well. Even food, that fire needs to be so hot to actually break that down. You put an orange peel in the fire. When you put that fire out, that orange peel is still there. And those scents remain. And so when you move on to your next campsite, people who come to find the mess you've left are going to have animals and a mess to clean up. And it's just not a nice way to leave the site how you found it. And burying your food can also have the same consequences because most people don't know how to do it properly, or they don't do it far enough away from the campsite. And depending on what you bury, it can cause problems for the environment. And one thing I'll mention, more so trail side and snack talk, is people love to eat pears and apples and oranges and trail mix and all kinds of other stuff as they're hiking. And then they're like, oh, it's biodegradable. I'm just going to throw it off on the side of the trail. It takes a while for those things to break down. Animals eat them and get habituated to food. And you can actually, depending on what you have, spread invasive species that way as well. You wouldn't think an apple as being invasive, but you throw your apple at the side and those seeds are viable and can grow an apple tree in the middle of a provincial park somewhere. You might come across it every now and then where you find an apple tree and you're like, what on earth is it doing there? It's someone threw their apple core to the side of the trail and now it's growing. So it causes damage to the environment. Park staff have to go and cut them down and clean it up. That kind of stuff. So basically the goal is everything, even if it's cumbersome, should be brought out with you. And then it's sort of a practice makes perfect kind of deal. Your first trip, you might bring too little, might bring too much, but just bring it all out with you. And as you get more experience, you'll learn how much you're actually going to eat, how much you're actually going to use, what pieces of equipment you didn't really need, and improve your sustainable practices from that.
Thank you so much, Noah. So I think, yeah, it really just comes back to packing out what you've packed in. And I think it's really important that we touched on how it's not appropriate to burn your food scraps most of the time. So our last question kind of in this topic is around human waste. And although maybe something a little bit taboo to talk about, I think it's really important. So we're gonna pass it off to Claire, who has a video for us telling us some of the do's and don'ts for human waste in the backcountry.
So this topic is kind of taboo, I guess. Not everyone likes to talk about it, but it's a really important thing to talk about. So I'm glad the question was asked. So waste, especially human waste and hygiene products and different toiletries, can be very difficult to deal with in the backcountry. A lot of people don't know how to properly dispose of things. So that's why I think it's important to talk about this kind of thing. So if you're camping in an operating or maintained park, whether it be a national park, provincial park, or a private campground, or sometimes some crown land is operated by local staff, there's often going to be something called a thunderbox on your site. A lot of people, there's different names, treasure box is another one as well. So a thunderbox is essentially just a wooden box with a toilet seat on top and a hole underneath, and it's used for humans to go to the bathroom in. So this gets maintained by park staff. When the box gets filled, the box gets moved, the waste is buried into the ground, covered, and then the box gets moved to a different location around the campsite. The box is usually like pretty far back from the campsite, like where you're camping, so you don't smell anything and it's not any sort of wildlife attractant. But a lot of people don't realize that anything that goes into that hole is just getting buried into the ground. So it's essential that the only thing going in there is human waste and toilet paper. Now, some people do believe that you shouldn't even be leaving toilet paper in the box or in the hole, and that you should pack that out. That's definitely a personal preference, whatever you think. I think that's more of like the extreme view. I'm okay with leaving toilet paper in there. It does, normally it's pretty compostable, so it's not a huge issue. But some people, if you're really following the leave no trace principles of camping, will, carry that kind of thing out with them. But yeah, it's really important that no feminine hygiene products go down there, wet wipes, food, garbage, anything like that, because it will just stay in the ground. And it's as if you're just littering. It's the same kind of thing. So it can be extremely detrimental to the natural environment. So it's really important to make sure that the only thing going in those holes is human waste. Some campsites, such as non-operating campsites, like parks that are not maintained by park staff, as well as crownland, do not have these thunder boxes. So it's important to know what to do in this situation. And essentially, it's like the same thing. Just walk off into the bush, dig some sort of hole, do your business, cover it up, and that's the end of the day. So it's really imperative here that you make sure to cover it up and you make sure it's further away. So next campers aren't going to be disturbed by this. The people currently camping aren't going to be disturbed by this. And it kind of just leaves it off into the bush, just like an animal would do it. Yeah, it's just really important to remember the only thing, like really should not be leaving any garbage or food or anything like that in these holes, because it's just going to sit in the ground for a long time. So yeah, anything that you need to, any garbage or feminine hygiene products, things like that, you need to pack out if you're going to bring them in. So yeah, thanks.
So awesome, really great tips around waste. Just to Claire's point around toilet paper, my understanding is that different parks have different kind of regulations and recommendations for what you should do in that case. So just make sure you're doing your research ahead of time. I think she's speaking from an Ontario Parks perspective, where it's definitely is okay to put your toilet paper in the thunderbox, but just make sure you're doing that research in advance. And so just before moving on to the next topic, I'll open it up once again to all of our panelists if they want to add on to any of the points that have been made.
I'll add to what I said before, which I forgot to mention. And as a biologist, I believe it's very important and it's relevant to our sustainability talk here today. And that's what people might say is wild harvesting, to substantiate food while camping so they don't have to bring as much in with them, which basically means while you're out there, you're collecting wild foods, and that's normally plants. Some people fish as well, which is completely sustainable, but I'm going to focus on plants. In most parks, it's not allowed as a blanket statement. It just sort of destroys the environment, and there's so many people visiting these parks. If everyone did that, there'd be nothing left. So that includes berry picking and picking up plants and vegetation. Leek is really big right now, and many other things. So it's best that you don't go in with that plan in mind. Crownland camping and some of the non-operational parks, like Claire was saying, have different rules regarding those. And in some cases they are allowed, but it needs to be done sustainably. And most people don't know what that means. And if you're going to take that route, you should spend the time to really do a deep dive. There's lots of online resources around it, but avoid collecting from the environment if possible would be my suggestion, because there's a severe decline in those species around the whole province, but even more so in Southern Ontario where we are.
Thank you so much, Noah. A great reminder. And so our next topic is around fires and burning responsibly. So in terms of park rules and when you can and cannot have a fire and doing so responsibly, we have Claire who's going to share some tips for us as well.
Question as well, because fires are kind of like the quintessential thing to do while camping or enjoying the outdoors. So I think it's a really important topic to discuss. So yeah, everyone enjoys a fire while they're camping, roasting marshmallows, singing songs, telling stories, that kind of thing. It is an essential part of a camping trip, but they can be extremely dangerous, and it's really important that when camping in the backcountry and in any sort of campground, you follow the rules in regards to fires. So the first main thing I will cover, and I am talking about this from an Ontario Park standpoint and kind of the rules we have around this, so take that into consideration when you listen to this. But essentially the first rule and the most important rule about having a fire is having it in a designated fire pit. So backcountry campsites will have a fire pit that's just like rocks piled up. They can be pretty high, and you know that's a designated fire pit. There's rocks in a circle, there's birch wood in there oftentimes, so you know that's where to have a fire. When you're in the campground, it's often, like many parks, it's a metal fire pit with a grate on top. So those are the two locations that you're allowed to have a fire. This rule is put into place to ensure that fires are being contained within one area and people are not having fires off into the bush or on the beach or anything like that. Fires outside of these designated areas pose a huge risk to or anything like that. Fires outside of these designated areas pose a huge risk to starting forest fires. So it's really important that you're only burning inside of that designated area. Another thing that's important to know is that all fires must be attended at all times, and leaving a fire unattended is a fine that park wardens can give, and it's pretty hefty, and it's just to ensure that no fire is getting out of control. So, you know, before you go to bed, put the fire out. If you leave the campsite, put the fire out. I know it kind of sucks if you have to put water on it, but if you were to start a forest fire from this, you could face huge consequences, as well as just like the knowledge of burning a forest down is pretty horrible. So yeah, it's really important that you take care of your fire and you make sure that it's in control in that designated fire zone or fire pit. The next thing we'll talk about is restricted fire zones, or fire bans, as most people know them as. So fire bans are put into place by local municipalities or by parks when the bush is really dry. So when there's a higher risk for a forest fire to occur from sparks, from a fire, from lightning, things like that. So fire bans are put into place during those times. And it's really important that this rule gets followed. Many people think, oh, I have fires all the time. I know how to, deal with a fire. If it were to get out of control, I'd put it away right away. It's just one of those things that it expands and grows before you even know it. If you heat up the ground too much, you can have a root fire, and it expands without you literally even seeing flames. And before you know it, you really can't deal with it. So it's just important to remember that anytime you're camping anywhere or using the outdoors and there's a fire ban, you do not have a fire, because it is an extreme offense. It can result in a big fine, and it also risks burning down our natural environment, our ecosystems, harming our wildlife, and destroying parts of our parks. So yeah, fires are one of those things where they're really awesome, and they're just like, they seem like the essential part to camping, but they do pose a risk, and people who choose to have fires need to do so responsibly. The next thing I'll quickly mention too is, in the backcountry, you can burn sticks and logs that have fallen, any deadfall that's on the forest floor, you can burn that. You're not expected to carry in wood, but when you do camp in parks and campgrounds, like if you're doing car camping, you cannot burn any deadfall, as we are trying to preserve the ecological integrity of the park. And that deadfall actually is really good for forest growth. And if everyone in the campground were to burn that deadfall, our forest would be a lot less healthy. So that's why there is wood that is sold at park stores, or you can bring it in from elsewhere as long as it's safe to do so. So yeah, that's a bit more about like fires and how you should do it in the backcountry.
Awesome tips. So I was going to pass it off to Noah now as well, and I think we've touched on some of these items. But in terms of items that are okay to burn, what's important to remember in terms of what is and isn't okay to burn? Like, for example, why is it important not to burn your trash? So I think we've touched on some of those things, if there's anything we want to add. And then additionally, when you are making a fire in the backcountry and you haven't carried in wood, normally, as Claire mentioned, this involves taking some resources from the surroundings, such as wood and kindling. And so how can campers ensure that they're using the land's resources responsibly, and what should they avoid doing?
Just to recap sort of our trash burning things, like we said, really you shouldn't burn anything. The only thing that I would say is okay to burn is paper products, because they pretty much burn up right away. That being said, if they're really like oily or greasy or have lots of food residues on them, I wouldn't suggest burning them, because the scent remains even after the paper itself has been burnt, and you're going to attract animals to your campsite. But aside from that, general rule of thumb, don't burn anything that's not like leaves and sticks from the environment. Regarding sustainable fire use in the backcountry, this involves using only what they consider deadfall, which means dead wood that is on the ground, fallen over. So if you find wood that you think is dead, like a tree, but it's still standing up and it hasn't fallen over yet, you're not supposed to touch it. And in fact, most parks, it's against park rules, and you can be fined if they catch you. And that's just to preserve the environment as well. And what you consider dead might not actually be dead. So the rule of thumb is, if it's on the ground, it's fair game. You can cut it up, bring it back to your site. That being said, you should try and go as far away from your campsite as possible in search of wood. That sort of spreads out where people are looking and puts less of an impact on one small area. And then also only collect what you need. Yes, it's really nice to have a fire, but if it's not really cold out or at night, or you need it for cooking, I wouldn't have a fire burning all day long. It just kind of wastes wood and you just have to continue to feed it. You can light it when you need to cook, put it out, or if you want it at night, have your campfire and then put it out when you're done for the night. You don't need to stoke it all night long. You don't need to stoke it all day long. It's just wasteful, really. And then those backcountry sites already have limited amounts of dead wood around, and you're just going to completely remove everything, and then other people won't be able to enjoy the area. Some parks have rules where you actually can't collect wood from campsites in the backcountry, and what they say is more so with canoe sites, but you actually have to collect wood on the way to your site. So they say while you're going along on your trip, stop here and there, collect some wood. That way it spreads things out more and people aren't totally trashing sites around them. You'll often find if you are visiting the backcountry that you see axe marks all over trees, all the low-lying branches are completely gone. Those are people improperly camping, basically. And then small fires. You don't need a giant bonfire. The bigger the fire, the more likely you're going to have it get out of control. So small, contained, and in the fire pits, like Claire said. And one thing I will add, it's not really do with fires, but just camping and sustainability in general. Like Claire said, when there's fire bans, you're not supposed to have a fire. So if you are betting on your campfire being your source for cooking your food, you need to have planned ahead of time that that won't be the option, and you'll have to bring a camp stove, and those have to be ones that have an external fuel source like propane or butane or some other liquid fuel like that. It's important to note that wood burning stoves, like little stick stoves, or they're called alcohol burning stoves, are not allowed and not permitted during fire bans, even though a lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, I'm bringing my camp stove, it's fine. But the only ones permitted are the little propane stoves. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much. So much to consider regarding fires and how to do so responsibly. So at this point, I'll just see if any of our other panelists want to add on to the topic of sustainability in fires. Okay. So I'll move on to our next topic, which has to do with other kind of considerations for protecting ecosystems on land. And so I'm going to pass this off to Nicole from kind of a wildlife protection perspective. Why is it important not to feed food to wild animals when in conservation areas? And I think a lot of this would also be applicable in trails and larger camps as well.
So thanks, Gabby. Actually, in my notes here, I wrote in all capital letters, do not feed animals. That's how important it is. Over at the Royal Botanical Gardens, especially at Cherry Hill Gate, it's rampant. People love to feed the animals, chipmunks, birds, they'll come right into your hand. So this actually alters their behavior, their nesting, their hibernation patterns. It dulls their natural senses to predators and preys because they're starting to see humans as friends and as sources of food. In addition to just changing their overall behavior, it changes the population balance between birds, other animals, and plant life. So because more birds and more animals are being fed, more are going to come to that area because they now know it's a source of food. When humans aren't around, they're going to be eating things that they normally would eat, but because the population of animals has gotten so high, there's not enough food to go around, and it's really harming the overall ecosystems. So if you didn't listen to anything I just said, and you're like, I'm still gonna feed the animals, I mean, I really advise against feeding the animals, but if you do feed the birds, please make sure it's a very small amount of a high quality seed. Don't feed them any human food. Don't feed them anything that is foreign to their environment, and never feed birds bread. This is a big one. So we like to say at the RBG, there are no bred trees in nature. It can actually lead to wing rot and water issues. It causes mold on the water, and then the birds will literally rot from the inside out. I know that's a little maybe too gruesome for this panel, but it is what happens, and people think that they're helping the animals by feeding them, but they're actually causing a lot of harm to them and their populations. So don't feed the animals, please.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Such important things to keep in mind, kind of like not just when camping, just around your local parks as well. And so on a slightly different topic or different note, we all know it's also important kind of to stay on designated trails when you're in conservation areas, but this isn't always followed. So I'll ask Nicole first, from the perspective of kind of protection of ecosystems, why is it important to stay on designated trails?
So I have three kind of general points, and they're really applicable to the trails around Hamilton, but they also apply to backcountry camping and trails all throughout Canada, really. Is first, this is for your safety and plant and animal safety. So plants actually can defend themselves in many situations by leaving rashes or some type of toxin on your skin. So of course you want to avoid that, especially if you're staying overnight somewhere. It's going to be really unpleasant to endure that for the rest of your trip, but even for a day trip, no one wants poison ivy on them. Secondly, when you're off the trail, it may look like open space or it may look like it's just forest floor, but in reality, you're actually stepping on plants that are in the undergrowth and possibly animals as well. Again, this can be so detrimental to the natural ecosystems and wildlife as well. Endangered plants that are just budding up from under the soil are stepped on and crushed. So it's really important to make sure you're on the designated trail area that has been cleared so there's no risk of stepping on any animals or plants. And then my third point is that if you are off the trails, you're more likely to get plant matter and seeds on your clothes and carry it place to place. So this works two ways, getting plant matter on your clothes when you're in the forest, bringing it to another part of your forest or home, or bringing some type of plant matter that's already on your clothes and maybe you don't see it into the forest. Now this is bad for two reasons. One, it messes with the natural balance of the ecosystems that are already in place. And two, it introduces invasive species to different areas. Now, invasive species, as the name suggests, they are invasive. This is a huge issue with burdock and garlic mustard. They will just completely take over an area, and people don't realize that they're transferring them from place to place. But if you're staying on the trails, it's less likely that you're going to be picking anything up and carrying it somewhere else. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I know I can get excited about exploring, and so it's really important to have those kind of impacts in mind and remember not to step off the trail. And so I just wanted to pass it off to Noah now in case he had anything to expand on in terms of staying on trail in the backcountry, and if this looks any different than kind of what Nicole already mentioned. And if not, that's okay too.
A lot of the same stuff. It pretty much is the same backcountry or front country. For trails, they take a lot of work and a lot of insight and a lot of planning to build. So if you think, well, you're walking along and you're like, hey, this looks like a better way to walk, someone else has already thought of that way before you in the planning process and has deemed, no, it's not. That's either there's species at risk, an endangered species somewhere off in that direction, or sensitive environments like Nicole was saying, if it's just a big open area and there's lots of leaf litter and stuff, you might not realize it, but little things like salamanders, that's their home. They just love wet leaf litter. So you got a big open area under tree cover, there's almost definitely salamanders there, and you're going to be stepping all over them. And just if you're going off trail, you're like, oh, it's just me, I'm fine, it's one person. Once you've done that, you've made a small trail, and every single person who sees it is like, oh, there's something down there, and is going to follow and follow and follow and make that situation 1,000 times worse, to the point where there's basically 2 trails now, and then 3 trails and 4 trails and 5 trails, and it leads to habitat fragmentation within both small and large systems, which really is not good and is the opposite of what you're trying to do while being sustainable out in the forest. So keep on the trails. They were designed to put you in a certain spot. They are not always the most ergonomic, but if they're not ergonomic, that means they're protecting something. So please follow them. I'll add, a lot of people really don't like mud, and they'll be like, oh, the trail's muddy, I'm gonna walk beside the trail. And the next person does that, and the next person does that. And suddenly a trail that was a few feet wide becomes 5-10 meters wide. So if you're going out, it's after it's rained, wear shoes you don't mind getting muddy. Don't expand the trail. And I'll also add, don't throw wood over muddy sections. Don't throw boards, don't throw sticks and logs, being like, oh, I want to cross this area to protect my shoes. What you don't realize is that little wet, muddy space under those leaf litter and sticks and boards is the perfect place for little things like snakes and salamanders and frogs. They will go under the smallest nook and cranny, even if you think it's flat to the ground. They're under there. And when people put those on trails, they inadvertently are creating a trap. So an animal's going to go under there, and then someone's going to come walking along and basically crush them. A lot of trail managers, when they find them, take them apart, and when they're taking them apart, they find a whole bunch of flattened wildlife underneath them. So it's very unfortunate. So basically the thing I'm trying to stress is stay on the trail. There's not really any good reason to go off of it, and don't sort of manage the trail yourself. It was designed the way it was designed for a certain purpose, and it's not for you to sort of question it. Most of these trails are technically private property. A lot of any conservation area in Hamilton is technically private, even if it's from the Hamilton Conservation Authority or the RBG. A lot of people treat them as public land, so I can do what I want, but that's not in fact accurate. Your guests on the property, you should treat them that way. Otherwise, they'll be closed, like we've had in Hamilton, places like Abbie and Falls and others, where people are going off trails and getting hurt, and then it's closed for everyone. So you're not helping yourself, you're not helping anyone else who wants to sort of experience the area. That makes sense.
Thank you so much, Noah. And I know even with the mud, I've seen that in kind of Coots Paradise and around other Hamilton trails. So definitely kind of in our local sphere as well, with people like putting down wood and other ways to avoid the mud. Oh, Nicole, did you?
Sorry, it's just a really quick point. Just remember that when you're on a trail, like for plants and animals, this is their home year round, and we are really just visitors on the land. So you wouldn't want your visit that's either for a few hours or a few days to have detrimental and lasting impacts on local wildlife populations because of irresponsible behavior.
Summed up so beautifully. Thank you, Nicole. Abbie, did you want to add anything? No. Okay, cool. So the next topic that we were going to talk about was kind of within the context of backcountry camping. We may be near water, such as canoe camping. And so it's important to ensure that human practices are also not damaging aquatic ecosystems. And so Claire, we have asked her kind of to explain some of the most sustainable ways to use soap for hand, hair, dishwashing, and other ways to avoid harming the water regarding the use of soap.
This is another really good question that actually gets asked a lot from campers. And it's one of those things that a lot of people just like don't know how to stay clean while in the backcountry or while camping. It's kind of tricky. You're mostly dirty all the time and you kind of just have to accept that. But I will talk about ways you can do so responsibly. So the first thing I'll say with camping in the backcountry, you don't have any running water. You don't have any washrooms, showers, nothing like that. So it's a bit difficult to stay clean. And a big no-no that you cannot be doing is using shampoo or any soaps in water. Even if they are biodegradable soap, they're actually not biodegradable in any waterway, like streams, rivers, anything like that. They're not biodegradable in water. They're only biodegradable on land. So a lot of people don't know this and they will still shower in lakes with that biodegradable soap thinking, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, but it actually can have really harmful effects on aquatic life and our water ecosystems. So that's what I'll start off with. It's really important no matter where you are. Do not shower in a lake with biodegradable soap, with regular shampoo, anything like that, because it can be really, really harmful. So the alternative then is you can use biodegradable soap while you're on land. I should start by saying it isn't the best practice to be using any kind of soap in the backcountry, but it's understandable that when you're in the backcountry or when you're camping or whatever, you're going to want to clean up. But also a part of you needs to acknowledge that you're just going to get a bit dirty and that's just the way it is. So if you really need to clean up and have a shower, you smell, you don't feel good, of course, use that biodegradable soap, but do so on land. So just wetting your body, wetting your hair, and then using your biodegradable soap, shampoo, clean up, and then dumping water on your head while you're on land. That gives it a chance to filter through the soil before it reaches the water in any way. It's definitely not the perfect solution, and I'm sure there are environmental consequences with doing that, but that is kind of what we have so far, as anyways to my knowledge of how to kind of deal with showering and cleaning up in the backcountry. This is the same for washing dishes. It's not appropriate to wash dishes in the lake with your soap right there by the shoreline. What is more appropriate is bringing a dish bin when you're camping, filling up your dish bin with lake water, using that biodegradable soap, doing your dishes, and then walking that dirty dishwater off into the bush where it's not going to attract wildlife to your campsite and where it's not going to easily flow into water and cause pollution into the water systems. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where dishwashing, hand washing, and showering and maintaining your personal hygiene is really important, but it can be a little tricky in the backcountry. And it's important that unless you find a product where you know it's 100% safe to put in those waterways, then don't use any sort of other products. Because yeah, if you know that of a product that is really good, of course you can use it. But it's when those products like your regular shampoo or body wash gets put in those lakes and rivers and streams, it can be really dangerous for those aquatic life. And the goal of what we're doing here is try to promote ecological integrity and maintaining the natural beauty and health of those ecosystems, and using things like those shampoos and soaps can be really harmful for those ecosystems. So it's important to use things like biodegradable soap or natural soaps as much as possible when in the backcountry. So yeah, that's a bit more about showering and how to maintain your personal hygiene without harming the water.
Thank you so much to Claire for that. So that was kind of one topic around personal hygiene that can have potentially harmful impacts to aquatic ecosystems. I just wanted to open it up now to the rest of our panelists for other considerations for preserving aquatic ecosystems and potentially other practices that people might engage in that are harmful to waterways, and what we can do to kind of minimize those effects. And one question that a participant brought up, thank you Kendra for this question, is it bad to paddle through lily pads? So I will see if any of our panelists want to jump in. Noah, yeah, go for it. Thank you.
So I can start off by answering the lily pad question. Lily pads and other floating aquatic vegetation are for the most part pretty hardy. They are used to floating on the surface, and they're there during storms and waves and all kinds of stuff. That being said, if possible, I would encourage canoeing around those patches. Most of the time, there's already a clear area in a lake where there's either a current or a clear canoe route that other people have taken. You canoeing through it once is not necessarily going to harm anything, but if a lot of canoers are doing that, so canoe after canoe after canoe all day long, every day, all summer long, then those plants have too much disturbance and they'll die. But if you have to go through it once here and there, you're not going to be doing anything big, but I would say if possible, avoid it. Adding on to lily pad stuff, it's not really directly related, but they have really nice orange and white flowers. But there's actually rules in most parks against picking them. They call it lily poaching, and it's actually, you can be fined for it because they're so pretty, everybody wants one. And so you'll go and they'll get cleared out by people, and people will actually take them home and sell them and stuff. So you're supposed to leave it where you found it so other people can enjoy it. But relating to protecting aquatic ecosystems, I would mention one thing is rocks and logs and other things that are found within lakes, rivers, streams. It's really the only other part that I can think of being related to the outdoors and camping. Leave whatever's in a waterway in a waterway. By removing those logs, those rocks, you're removing habitat, and something was using those, whether it was an insect or a fish or a snake or a turtle or whatever it was. They're there for a purpose. And a big issue is everybody wants to create an inukshuk. For the people who don't know what that is, it's indigenous, mainly from indigenous people from the Arctic area, but it is further south as well, where they piled stone rocks into sort of a shape of a person, and they were used for travel landmarks, but people just think they look cute and cool, and so people build them all over the place, but they are extremely detrimental to the environment. You're removing little micro habitats and basically piling stones so people think they look nice, which is not doing anything. But you're go to one place and someone sees it and like, oh wow, I want to build one too. And you go to some places and there's hundreds of them within just a few meters of each other. And you'll go like to some rivers where they're in really popular areas or lakesides. There's not a stone in the river or a stone in the lake edge, because all those rocks, all those inukshuks were once in the water. And once they're gone, you're completely destroying an environment. A lot of fish require rock to lay their eggs. Same with a lot of reptiles and amphibians. Well, not reptiles in water, but amphibians and a lot of invertebrates. So once that's gone, you're basically removing a key part of the ecosystem, and there can be like a domino effect afterwards. So that would be what I would say.
I actually didn't know that. So thank you, Noah. I didn't know about the rocks. And I guess I have been a lily poacher in the past, but I will no longer be a lily poacher. Thanks for the information.
The rock thing applies to rocks on land as well, but this was an aquarium.
Well, thank you so much. And so if we have no other additions on that topic, I'll go to kind of our last topic. And just in the interest of time, we'll try to go through this one kind of quickly. So this is less to do with when you're camping, but kind of more your preparations beforehand and around kind of gear and kind of consumerism in the outdoors community. Sometimes outdoor activities can promote kind of a culture of consumerism and, buying more items to simplify your outdoor adventures. And sometimes items are unnecessary, or maybe they're sitting around kind of not being used most of the time when you're not on a camping trip. And so I wanted to pass it off to Abbie if you had any kind of considerations for people when they are buying new products, what to keep in mind, and maybe also kind of being aware of greenwashing, if that's used at all in the outdoors community, and if you can kind of explain what that term means.
Sure. So first off, considering buying new gear, question yourself, do you need to buy this? Can you borrow or rent it? For example, when I went on the Hawaii camping trip with McMaster, with Noah, I ended up borrowing some stuff from the office because I don't own any camping gear, and still to this day, when I went on my camping trip a month ago, I don't even own a tent or a sleeping bag. I borrow everything from friends and from family members, taking into consideration COVID. So there were people within my bubble, so that was fine. But so first question, if you actually need to buy it, can you borrow or rent first? And then if you are looking at buying something, look at where it's made. Who are the people who are making the equipment? What type of lifestyle are they living in? How are they paid? You need to consider things like that. What are the company's core values? Is sustainability rooted at the center or not? And also look at the quality of the item. If it is durable, then it's likely going to last longer than just buying something that's cheaper. So then you'll have to, you won't have to buy it as often if it's going to last a long time. The main thing I would just say is to vote with your wallet if you're going to buy something. You as the purchaser have the ability to support companies that have good values that are in line with yours if you want to live a sustainable lifestyle. And then as for greenwashing, if this is a new term for you, it's basically when a company or organization spends more time and money on marketing themselves as environmentally friendly than actually on minimizing their environmental impact. Like an example of this I see often is when you go to a store and they're like, oh, here, take a reusable grocery bag. It's made out of recycled water bottles. There's actually studies that show that reusable bags have a worse impact in a larger life cycle analysis than the single disposable grocery bags. So try to, if you already have bags at home, just remember to bring them with you. Try to never take them from stores. Do you really need a bag for things like that? And yeah, look into companies before investing in them and just vote with your wallet.
Thank you so much, Abbie. I know I was mind blown when I learned that reusable shopping bags can actually be worse than plastic shopping bags if they're not used enough times to justify. So definitely the same kind of idea in terms of having your items for a long time can apply to gear as well. And so I just wanted to see, Noah, if you had any kind of other recommendations on minimizing the number of products that somebody might need to buy in terms of, balancing being prepared and with balancing being prepared for an outdoor adventure. And if there are any resources like lending libraries that might be available to incoming students.
A lot of it is piggybacking off of Abbie, but for purchasing gear, you want to, like Abbie was saying, gear that's going to last. Unfortunately, the outdoors is an expensive hobby, but honestly, investing doesn't necessarily need to be the most expensive product, but the more expensive, higher quality product, even though in the short term, it's going to hurt your wallet potentially, in the long term, it's going to last you a really long time. Like I have a hiking pack that's over 12, 14 years now, still fine. And other people own packs and tents that they own for 30 years and are still going strong. And that's because they go with the big, well-known, well-respected brands rather than the Canadian Tire tent that might be way cheaper and you might think, oh, it's within my budget right now, but it lasts you one season and then you've got to buy another one. Not saying you have to buy the expensive stuff when you're just starting out because it can be a little sort of overbearing, but it's something to definitely consider. And I would say shop with Canadian companies and Canadian made if possible. That helps with shipping. Things don't have to fly by airplane necessarily. There's a lot of Canadian companies and a lot of Canadian manufacturers that manufacture here rather than in the States or overseas. So that's where I would go. And places that have sort of environmental practices like Patagonia or MEC that doesn't even give plastic bags and things like that. Related to not owning your gear and potentially resources and gear libraries, there are a lot of them out there. And I would encourage you to, if there's not one in your city, then look at the destination you're traveling to, because there's probably one there. Almost every park has an outfitter nearby where you can rent gear from. Almost every university that has an outdoor club, including McMaster, has gear libraries that they rent out to people. And if you went on a McMaster trip, there's no fees to use those, but if you were to use them outside of it, there are small fees involved. McMaster has it, U of T has it, Guelph, Waterloo, Queens, so Ottawa, so all over Ontario, all the universities do. There's MEC here in Burlington and some of the other MECs, as well as Hikers Haven and Oakville are probably the two biggest ones that are close to us, but almost every provincial park has an outfitter nearby as well, which I would definitely encourage checking out. And then not everyone has to own everything, and then they are keeping things up to date. You save money on having to do repairs and maintenance on gear, so it can be easier and less scary if you want to get involved that way. So yeah, I would say there's lots of lending libraries out there is basically what I'm trying to do. And that goes for maps and things as well too. It's not just the big name gears. There's places you can rent hiking shoes and hiking poles and map of the area or anything like that.
Thank you so much, Noah. Yeah, it's really exciting that MAC has that service available to students. And of course, in a COVID context, maybe looking a little bit different, but kind of good to note. And Alyssa mentioned in our chat, which is a great option as well, that thrift stores can also be a good place to look for used camping items. And again, kind of that's an already used item, so still reducing kind of the environmental impact of the items that you're using. And you can always donate them back again or continue to share them. And so at this point, I just wanted to open it up to each of our panelists if they do, and if not, it's totally okay. If they had kind of any other recommendations or considerations for how to try as much as possible to ensure your outdoor adventures are as sustainable as possible. We, touched on questions in specific areas, but maybe you had something you wanted to bring to the conversation that wasn't addressed in any of those conversations. So I'll just see now if anybody wants to do that. And then after that, we'll go to a Q&A session.
One thing I'll just mention is this was a lot of information, and don't set high expectations. Don't be like, I'm going to go completely green, completely everything right off the bat. A lot of these cost, and a lot of them require a lot of planning and experience, and you kind of learn as you go. So I would encourage you to start small and then incrementally work your way up rather than kind of jumping in right from the beginning.
Yeah, and one thing I just wanted to add, just a little bit of like words from wisdom. One of my favorite quotes is by Anne-Marie Bonneau. You might have heard of it. It says, "We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly." I think that this quote also applies to everything we talked about here. We're not all going to be perfect, but if we can take steps in our own actions to reduce our environmental impact, why not try and do them? So yeah, that's all I wanted to finish off with.
Thank you so much. All great points to end off with our panel discussion. So at this point, we wanted to open it up to any of the participants to see if they had any questions. And so participants, you can feel free to use the raising your hand function, or test with coming on live, and we can work it out so that not everybody, I don't think everybody will speak at once, but if that does happen, or if you want to pose a question in the chat, either me or Hannah can ask that to the panelists if you feel more comfortable that way. So yeah. So somebody is raising their hand.
Hello?
Yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Okay, hi. So it's more of a concern, and not specifically for a campaign, but just sustainability in general. So most times when people promote sustainable lifestyle, it's kind of hard for um people in the middle class or lower class to actually practice it, because for a long time all they've been used to is like to buy package like things that are cheaper, and the things that are cheaper actually consume more waste and plastics and items like that. So it's more of a not really a question, but like a pitch to find out how do you think people from those classes or different lifestyles in general can seek ways to like improve, like to be more sustainable. So for example, you'd be like, oh, don't use plastic bags, right? But like to use the net bags for grocery shopping is actually more expensive for them, or like things that you could easily suggest to people to flip, they're actually more expensive for those people in those like classes or groups of society. And then it becomes like sustainability lifestyles for the rich, and then like there's a disparity in that. So I was wondering if people could shed light on that. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you for your question. This is Abbie here. I definitely feel that this is a real concern. A lot of people think that living a sustainable lifestyle is some exclusive, expensive thing that you have to do. You have to buy the expensive Swell water bottle everyone has. You have to buy like the really nice Matt and Nat recycled plastic water bottle backpack, for example, or shop from Patagonia, and it's all expensive. And it's not the case if you want to live a sustainable lifestyle. There's likely things around your house that you can use instead of purchasing the most expensive thing. Like using, when you go grocery shopping, you can see on top of my cupboards here, I have about 50 glass jars that were going to be thrown into the recycling, but I wash them out, clean them, and remove the labels. And that's what I put all my food in. You don't need to go out and buy jars to store all your food in that look pretty and have matching labels. So I think it's just a question of, is there something you already have that can be better? Like even using your backpack for carrying stuff. You might already have one from school, or you likely have a bag of some sorts hanging around that you can put your groceries in, so you don't need to buy like one of those fancy mesh ones or whatnot. And then possibly buying at farmers markets can be cheaper because it hasn't traveled as far, and then you can also feel good about supporting the local economy. You know, when you go to Fortino's, for example, and you see all the organic produce, it's so much more expensive. So trying to buy it more locally can help save money. Taking public transit, trying Sobe, they have great, it's called the Everyone Rides initiative. So they have subsidized biking costs as well to increase accessibility. There's lots of different options, but that's such a great topic to bring up. So thanks for that question. I'll open it to other panelists who want to comment on anything else too.
Yeah, if I could just hop in. Abbie, everything you said is so great. And like, I know personally over the past few years, like I've struggled with like the new rise of the sustainability movement, because it's like, oh, I want to use like these trendy mesh bags that you were talking about, but I have all these plastic bags. Well, it'd just be worse to throw away the plastic bags. So what we do is we just use them until we literally can't anymore. And now a lot of grocery stores, they have fees for plastic bags. So that 10 cents each time adds up. And I mean, by the time you buy so many bags, you could have probably got like a reusable bag, or you can just keep reusing the plastic bags until you can't anymore. Another tip, this is just me like as a gardener, gardening and growing your own food is one of like the best ways to be sustainable, foster like individual food security, all for like a relatively low cost. Obviously there are some very expensive like gardening things that you can get, but a lot of people have seed shares and they'll give you seeds for free. I know in Ward 3 where I live, they're giving out tons and tons of seeds. So really all you need is a pot and some soil and some seeds. I mean, ask your friends, ask your neighbors, there's Facebook groups. Always try like, the sustainability movement can be overwhelming. So like Abbie's quote, you don't have to be perfect. Look for the small things that are reasonable for you financially and just based on your overall life.
Thank you so much to everybody who kind of contributed to that discussion. I think that's such an important topic. And yeah, I think both Nicole and Abbie brought up some great ideas, and hopefully we can continue that discussion. I think, yeah, what I find concerning is when it's kind of like people buy new things to like look a certain way and like look like they're being like trendy and sustainable, but probably aren't actually. So whatever you can do that's accessible to you and you doing your best is amazing. And yeah, just kind of using what you have available within your house as much as possible. So I just want to see if anybody else has any other questions for our panelists as well. Again, feel free to use the raise hand function or write them in the chat. And if we don't have any more questions right now, that's totally okay. If a question does come to you later, maybe you just didn't feel comfortable asking it right now, all of our panelists have agreed very graciously to share their contact information. And so we'll be sharing that on the Microsoft Teams Moose group. And so you can reach out to any of them